Good.
Okay, so today is June 6, 2021, and we're going to continue our discussion on the Desiderata Extinctionati. And it looks like, based on the comments, we have a suggestion from Gary. He said, communities have to share everyone's psychology because there's no such thing as a personal problem. And then I responded, also, if everyone's psychology is poorly equipped for collapse or resistance, what can be done to change it? And then Sophie responded, knowing yourself, and knowing yourself. And she concluded saying, communities share everyone's psychology, but they are not aware of it. Results of this should be discussed. Personal mental health issues are everyone's.
Do you want to start off, Sophie?
Yeah, well, I just, yeah, what my last comment was about the fact that we are not aware that we perceive everybody's mental health problems, and it's part of this kind of intersubjectivity thing. I think we talk too much about individual psychology, and we're not enough plugged into the fact that any human group or any family, or like, for example, I take a group of women, when they live long enough together, they tend to ovulate and have their periods at the same time. This is a thing that nobody has ever really studied or explained, but it's actually a fact. It happens in tribes because people live closely together, and that's why women usually are fertile at the same time. You know, it was studied by anthropologists in so-called primitive societies. So I think when it comes to psychology, we have the same phenomenon, and it's very interesting that Gary says communities have to share everyone's psychology because there's no such thing as a personal problem. And I really was very interested with this. So it would be interesting to discuss that. I think that's something that you would probably enlighten us on a little bit.
Yeah, so just on that point about anthropologists, just one further detail to that is that they actually synchronize their cycle based on the dominant female. So it's not arbitrary. And so anthropologists know that, to the point that they, if they're on some field trip or something, or in a dorm, then they say, like, oh, I quickly got them synchronized with my cycle, basically the dominant matriarch. Anthropologists take pride in the fact that if the dominant matriarch, then all the students or something synchronized with them in a dorm. So it's a well-known thing, but that leads us straight into this thing about dominance, and that's the thing about a shared problem, that there's no such thing as individual psychology or an individual mental problem. It's a group activity. You can't, if you are. I always think, like, if you were on a desert island on your own, if you were Tom Hanks, you've got Wilson there, but you can't really have a really psychological crisis like you can, say, in a family that R.D. Laing studies. And now what R.D. Laing found was that when you have a family that comes into, say, therapy for some family problem, then what always happens is that the psychotherapist or psychiatrist just interviews each member of the family. They basically single out one person who has the problem, and they focus on that person. And we found out it was always the victim. So they always have some power person, often the patriarch, the father figure, is causing all the mayhem in the house. But what happens is the psychiatrist, who's also a power figure, will collude with him to find the problem in the person that copes with the power dominance worst of all. So in other words, the victim. And then the rest of the family falls in to make it one individual's problem. But it's almost definitely the wrong person, because the person that's victimized and suffering and showing all the worst symptoms is the person that is causing the social dynamic that they originally come into the clinic for. The one that's contributing to it least. And I think today still they don't recognize that. And this goes all the way into our bigger society, where you have this structural system, you have this dominance hierarchy, and then it's causing the structural violence. And then people at the bottom, the weakest members of society, they taking all the stress, they committing suicides, they becoming addictive, and then those become social problems. But the social problem is the guy at the top. It's not the guys at the bottom. They're victims and showing the symptoms. And so what we do is all these programs. Now, the same thing is happening where this guy, all these shooters and stuff, this guy in Belgium and all this, they're saying, well, we need all these more programs. I just posted something in Tucson where they're having an epidemic of suicides in kids in school. And so they're going to do more programs. It's like, no, the programming is the problem. But they will not focus on the person causing the problem because they're a power figure. And that's what R.D. Laing found. But
that's
fascinating.
That's fascinating that it's the dominant in the group that is determining. It's fascinating. I must read more about this. But
this is so damned important that in our culture too, because they recognize, our culture recognizes and values dominance and psychopathy and just straight out bullies. We admire them in our culture, and so they get off scot-free. But it goes all the way down to this very interesting experiment that shows you this in baboon troops. So this was something that's well worth looking. They should teach this to kids in school, I think. But it's this study about violence in baboons. And the story is that an anthropologist in Kenya was studying this baboon troop. Baboon troops is very, very stressful in a baboon troop. Baboons are not very nice animals. The social life is very stressful because they attack each other a lot. And they have dominance hierarchies, male dominance hierarchies. Now, what happened in this one group was it got too close to this game reserve and the safari reserve that had a rubbish dump. The dominant males in the troop, they got hold of meat that had tuberculosis, and baboons are very susceptible to tuberculosis. Because they were the dominant ones that basically, stomped on all the others to get to the meat, it turned out that the dominance hierarchy was decapitated. The most aggressive, vicious ones were wiped out. Now, what happened was that the troop turned almost like bonobos. And it became a matriarchy. The matriarchs ruled. They stopped all this vicious behavior. They started grooming each other. And now the males normally get ejected from the troop, and then they, go and join another troop. The amazing thing is that decade after decade, it actually established in the culture of the troop. So that I think 30 years later, the troop was still like a bunch of hippies. And what they found was the new aggressive males that came in with all this shit for brains baboon culture, they immediately dropped it as soon as they got into that group, and they found they didn't need that behavior. They found they could get groomed without being vicious. They didn't need any of that kind of dominance hierarchy. And it persisted. In fact, it's still persisting to this day. So they use it as an example.
I think you wrote that in one of the things you posted a while ago when you were starting to show pieces of your book. I think you used that I'd forgotten. Thank you for bringing that back. That's a very interesting observation.
Yes, you see, the implication for that is because we're intelligent enough to make these inferences. We are intelligent enough to implement them ourselves. So we have the self-awareness to create our own culture. And or if we did a culture where we just pop a cap in anybody that's dominant, we would have that culture. We would have the culture that everybody wants. So the secret to social change and to living in a kind of utopia without that's not dysfunctional is to basically pop a cap in those guys. But we can't do that because we're a bit too nice and we're a bit too so basically the reason why we can't have nice things is because we're not prepared to basically go to Brubaker Arms and do the necessary on these bullies. But all the bullies are unreformable, right? There's plenty of evidence that you cannot reform them. That's what's wrong with the social movement. That's why, just talking to Eric and stuff is that I think there's a fundamental, especially on the left, which is nice and mammalian brained and stuff. And they cannot believe that you can't get through to these people by showing compassion and being nice. And Eric also in that full spectrum resistance talked about John Brown and John Brown's rebellion, where his slave rebellion failed and he got hung because he was too nice. He basically, all the guys that he captured, he allowed them to see their families and he gave them food and he tried to show them, slave owners, that he had imprisoned. He tried to show them what compassion was like. The net result was he just wasted time, and a posse rode in and basically surrounded the slave revolt and ended it. But if he hadn't have been so nice to those guys, if he just shot them through the head, they would have been, the slave revolt might have succeeded. So the danger is you do a John Brown and you say, well, I'm a Christian, we've got to, forgive, and let's see if they cannot reform themselves. You've got to get that through your head. You need one bullet, one bully. It's the only way. But basically, what we've done in our culture is we've been too domestic and too permissive. So we've been too nice. And that allows these bullies to have free reign in our society. Now we're too nice to do anything about them. So what we've done is we've overlooked a necessary weeding that goes on in indigenous societies as they weed these guys out with prejudice. And we've neglected that. And so basically we are too soft now to do the weeding. And so these guys run rampant through the domestic culture.
But now the missionaries have arrived in the groups that you talk about. So Christian values have probably entered the,
Christian values have promoted psychopathy.
Yeah, that I agree on that. But we've all been brought up with this. We've all been brought up with this. All of us in the group.
Yeah, so I think it's necessary to go back to study this, to study where we went wrong. But it's not pleasant to do it because it's challenging to have these harsh truths exposed to us, and we're like, no, please say it ain't so. It's like, I'm sorry, man, this is the way it is.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, even though I know intellectually and a lot of I've questioned this story of the baboons and stayed with me when I read it months ago. And again, every time we repeat, yeah, the psychopaths are there. But you're struggling with an enormous baggage. an
Yes, but
enormous.
okay, so let's go forward on this conversation that we could never get to with Eric now. Is it, if you go back to that, what it implies is, if you think of all these guys, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all these psychopaths, Biden, a lot of them, they all psychopaths. Bojo, Angela Merkel, thank God she's going to step down into psychopath retirement. But all of these guys, the guys in Skull and Bones, the Bush crime family, all of these guys, psychopaths. They live psychopathic culture. It's inbred in them. They are irredeemable. Now, you cannot go on this flouncy notion that we can all have, all the nice people can get together and resist these people. It's like, no. It's a very, very easy problem. They carry on doing what they can get away with. So they feed on niceness. If anybody if any culture started a program of targeted assassinations, you wouldn't have to go very far down the list before you would stop fossil fuels in their tracks. If any one of these guys are going to do geoengineering, they're going to play with the planet, and nothing will stop them. But it's easy. It happened in the 1970s. They started down this path, and immediately it changed everything. So it happened in the 19th century. This is all airbrushed out of history because they don't want you to know what the kryptonite is. But anarchists...
Do you think that was behind the Red Army faction and the Germans, who started to attack big bankers and stuff like that? Do you think that was that sort of thinking that was behind them when they started the assassination?
Yes, but you see look what happened with Aldo Moro and stuff like that. Is everything changed? Everything changed in Italy. Now, what immediately the other side rallied to say, don't look at all the fact that they actually achieved their goals. Look at how terrible they are. Look at the children that suffered innocently. Look at the innocent people. They try and show you the blood. They try and show you how horrid these terrorists are. And so then they completely wipe over what Aldo Moro did and how many people wound up on a meat hook. They don't talk about that. But then they embellish, basically the mammalian brain, shock and awe. Look what these people, and then they try and get them and show them, kind of Braveheart style, hang, draw, and quarter them as exemplary things of what happens. If you go for kryptonite, this is what happens to you. And so that's the continual thing. But what gets airbrushed out is just how damned effective it is. And so what happened in the 19th century was all the Klaus Schwabs and stuff, all the oligarchs of today, all the billionaires and were aristocrats in those days. What's hidden from us today is that propaganda of the deed came very, very close to making a universal republic out of the world. So anarchists came very close to abolishing states worldwide and abolishing borders worldwide and instituting republics. In fact, they did. In fact, there's only a few left, like Sweden and Belgium and the UK, and they're just symbolic monarchies. So in essence, anarchists of the black hat assassin variety actually did change Europe to the extent that the last action of propaganda of the deed was actually Franz Joseph and Isabella Esmeralda, whatever his consort was, but he wasn't even the emperor. He was basically the heir to the imperial throne from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But the Black Hand were anarchists who killed him, assassinated Franz Joseph. The repercussions of that were so huge that it swept Europe into a war that we still really haven't got out of today. But that, I mean, we're talking two guys. One guy called Principe basically changed the world forever.
This is so powerful.
It's so damn powerful that people say, it makes a cycle of violence. Oh, it doesn't work. It's like, no, the kryptonite works. The kryptonite works. It's just a question of when you get to it. So you don't want to go and seek it out. But we have to get out of this nonsense that you can be pacifist and have your cake and eat it. Because all you fucking little liberals that think you're going to survive this, the 4 horsemen riding in, and you're going to get a planet, and it's all going to be nice, and it's going to be a Green New Deal, the psychopaths reform themselves, and we'll have social justice. It's not going to happen. You don't get that shit for free. You get that shit for blood. So basically, just get over it. We're not going to get there in any other way.
Lord Hugh, what about a psyop, like the threat of kryptonite? Would that even be sufficient?
Yeah, you see, the ultimate thing is a psyop. So you don't really want to use violence, right? But it's like, why would you want to hurt people that are innocent victims, and there's going to be collateral damage. So it's unconscionable to do violence, and it's only justified because you're forced by the psychopath. It's the psychopath psychopathy that forces us into doing it. Once we've done it, then we can put it behind us. But it's like Eric was saying in the previous interview, is we don't get to decide the tools. Is the enemy, it's like a duel. The enemy gets to decide the weapons. We're challenging them to a duel. So they get to choose the weapons. And they're psychopaths, so they've already chose. It's money and guns. So they said, okay, it's money and guns. All right, you chose, we comply. So you are complying with their diktat that it must be violence. We are trying to avoid violence. Violence is expensive. Violence is cruel. Violence is evil. And violence is fucking horrible. But they are choosing violence, so we have to respond. You don't see, this is what's so wrong with what everybody's doing, is they're thinking that they have a choice because they're liberals and consumers, and they've told, self-esteem movement has told it's all about them, and they're so full of their self-importance that they get to think that they choose. No, you basically die or fight. The psychopaths determine that. You don't get to do consumer choice and save the planet. You save the planet, and everybody that is going to survive the bloodiest fight the world has ever seen. So it's like, it would be fine if the psychopaths put down the weapons and said, we'd be nice. But refer back to the top. They're never going to do that. Because they would rather die than lose their position at the top. So therefore, they have to. They decided. They have the power, and they decided how this is going to be fought. But having said that, there's no point in, you can't say do what the Allies did. In the Allies, okay, let's look at, say, the Allies in World War II. The Allies started an area bombing campaign. It was a terrorist act. It was designed to terrorize Germany, because Britain didn't have the ability to strike back at Germany after Dunkirk. So it was done by this psychopath called Bomber Harris. And he decided, most people had the conscience to say, we are not indiscriminately going to bomb civilians in German towns. Bomber Harris said, we have to, because otherwise they're going to, gear up the manufacturing capability. They're going to throw all the weapons at the Eastern Front, and they're going to beat Russia. And then they'll come back and hit us. So basically, he convinced them, but this kind of Machiavellian consequentialism, to say that the ends justify the means. And so he started on what was blatantly a program of genocide, which he should have been, sent to The Hague for after the war. But anyway, okay, now look at the thing about what they're doing with violence. What's so wrong with what Bomber Harris did was that there's no way that Britain could drop so many bombs on Germany that they could physically stop their production capacity just by destroying it. Therefore, what Bomber Harris was doing, and everybody knew he was doing a terrorist war of psyops. And he was using area bombing, and we're talking in Dresden, 200,000 people died in a firestorm. It's one of the most terrible things you can imagine. They did it deliberately, and they did it again on Hamburg. Once they realized how to start a firestorm, they used it as a weapon. So a firestorm is where you do so much incendiary bombing that you start a local tornado, and the tornado basically gets hurricane force winds, that because you have this huge upwelling in this fire. If you burn a whole city, you get this huge upwelling of fire, and it starts to rotate. And so basically you get hurricane force wind. The winds alone can do more damage than the fire and the bombs. But once they realized that, they started using it as a tactic for mass weapons. It was extraordinary evil. But even with a firestorm, even with, say, NBC weapons, with weapons of mass destruction, you can't really knock out people's ability to manufacture. People go underground. They have defenses, but Germany put all the V weapons and stuff underground. They didn't really bomb Peenemünde into states. But what they're doing, they're not trying to do that. They say afterwards you justified with it, but they know very well what they're doing, and they're doing psyops. They're doing terrorism, and they're trying to terrorize the German people into saying, we will punish you so badly. You will lose your kids, your relatives, you'll lose your treasured things. They bombed Lübeck. Lübeck was a wooden town, a medieval wooden town with no military significance. The Germans didn't even defend it because they thought, what psychopath would bomb a place of cultural heritage and zero military strategic? They bombed it because it was wood and they could make a firestorm out of it. And it was to basically say to the Germans, right, we took out Lübeck, we took all your medieval treasures from Germany and Hamburg out. So it's basically, you carry on pursuing war, we will take you down. We'll take away everything you hold dear, and we will terrorize you into submission. And that's what we did. We're very nice. It was called the Good War. And that's what we did to the Germans. Remember that at this stage, they didn't know about the concentration camps and all the Holocaust, how we justified all of it. This was before they knew all that. So having said all that, saying, now what is so wrong with what Baum-Harris did was to do the same kind of psyops. You have to be more imaginative than that. You have to basically, it's very expensive to do a campaign like that. So you have to think up ways to be imaginative and do everything you can not to be violent, but with the same result from the psyops. So in a lot of ways, refraining from violence can ultimately have a bigger psychological impact, because the threat of violence, in people's imagination, the threat of violence is normally greater than the actuality. So in some instances, if you follow through with the actuality, it actually does diminish the actual result. So that's another reason why you don't want to be violent. But you can't be perceived to be pacifist. Otherwise, you lose the element of fear. And unless you can instill fear in these guys, you will not get anywhere with a psychopath. And and they will psychopaths.
But do you remember the campaign of bombing in London by the IRA in the 70s? And they started on a pub where the army guys used to go and usually celebrate, and that's their first bombing. And that's from that bombing came out the famous Guildford Four, who were arrested wrongly, were accused by the government of being the perpetrators. But after that, the same group continued a series. That was a bloody. That there was a lot of people killed, they were mostly military, but there was a few civilians in there too. And they continued a spree of bombings on restaurants and pubs all across London during that terrible winter. And terrible it was. Well, it was for the people, and they terrorized completely London. But after that one, they always called 15 minutes or 20 minutes before the explosions, and the casualties of all these bombings afterwards was completely ridiculous, very, very low. They could have killed hundreds with all the bombs that detonated, but they were always warning afterwards. The impact was enormous. The guys were captured. Actually, the Guildford Four, who were wrongly accused in the first pub, were kept in prison. They were kept in prison for 15 years and they had done nothing. But
And
it's
they knew it. They knew they'd done nothing.
yeah. But they got the guys at the end. They got the guys, but the guys were finally liberated after the Good Friday Agreement, and I've heard and I've listened to those guys, and they're certainly not. I'm not going to say they're not violent. They're not violent in this sense. These guys chose violence because it was the only way. They were not bloodthirsty. They were, it's very interesting to listen to those guys, since they've been they spent a long time in jail. They spent 20 years nearly in jail after that or more. But it's the psychology, and actually to come back to this question of Gary about there's no such thing. Well, there's no such thing as a personal problem. I think that those groups are extremely interesting to study, because they haven't. When you listen to those guys, their ego is kind of gone. They're. I don't know if you've studied people who have worked who have been activists in kryptonite.
Nelson Mandela was a case in point.
Uncle Ted, or all these. They're very interesting people to study. They're not, the way they're portrayed in the mass media is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. So the thing is that these days the need, you see, the need for the governments and the state to use kryptonite is much greater now, because the world has got more sophisticated and more automated and more electronic. So it means that you don't, if you actually against it, it's more like a Swiss watch. It's more delicate, it's fragile, and it's easier to sabotage it. So the global system is very, very fragile and easy to sabotage, as we've just seen in last year. But the alternative is not true. They have to get more violent now, because there's more at stake. There are more people. The people will be more desperate. So we're in a position where I think we have to get into the frame of mind that they will use violence wherever possible. We have to have a profile, a really low target profile, so that they don't have opportunities to use violence. Because if they catch you or something like that, they will torture you. Basically, you will suffer violence. And the opportunities for actually, doing a drone strike or something like they want to do, diminish as basically the world gets more online and more technical. So what it becomes is more like cyber warfare, and the violence is in things like people say, well, if the grid went down, or there was damage to infrastructure or anything like that, or logistics, the global logistics system, then people, the media would immediately say, oh, little old ladies died in hospital, and they would try and get those stories to make it sound like, it wasn't just against electronic infrastructure or against non-personal infrastructure. So they would try and make it personal and try and find a reason how, this kind of sabotage or something of the system results in personal tragedy. And that's what they would try and do. But it's all hokum, because, basically the personal tragedy is if we allow the grid to stay up. And it'll be an increasingly vacuous kind of argument, because if things go the way I think it is, which is basically more four horsemen of the apocalypse, and, you can imagine we'll soon be at war, then, it'll be much easier to show that taking down infrastructure actually prevents their ability to wage war. So you can see there that they will target you much more strictly, because it becomes sedition. It becomes treacherous to actually go against a country's infrastructure during a wartime. But that's where we're headed to. We're headed to a thing where, and this is why I kind of grieve, my heart bleeds when I talk to these activists, because they don't really understand where, well, my dark picture of where I think we're headed. But you've got to do ecological action in a time of war, which amounts to insurrection. So you know, and you have to do it on both sides. You have to basically do, you know, what I assume is coming down the pike is that it'll be Russia, Iran, and China on one side, and it'll be, you know, Saudi Arabia, Saudi America, and Israel on the other. And so you have to sabotage them all, because I don't think we can get through. You know, it doesn't work to side with any one particular party, and if you know, you can't rely on them destroying themselves with a war. A war would be long drawn out. It'd be like the Cold War, and there'll be lots of proxy wars in places like Iran and North Korea, and we're getting close to the point of view where they can start using nuclear weapons, and then that genie's out of the bottle. Once they start using them and they become like tactical weapons, people will normalize them, and then we'll start to see nukes used routinely as terror weapons. So, and so, you know, you have to imagine trying to do climate activism in that kind of scenario. I don't think all the tanks are going to be running on solar panels and wind farms. They're going to be running on fuel. And the military, I mean, a war is going to burn a hell of a lot of fuel in terms of jets and tanks and places. Basically, you see, China has to make it a ground war and make it a long grind, because that's what the West can't do, that kind of war. China's going to have to make it that kind of war. So it's going to be, you know, lots of proxy wars in like Kashmir, and between India and China, Taiwan, in Ukraine. We're gearing up for it. But just like with the pandemic, all the activists went to sleep during the pandemic, but the greenhouse gas didn't stop. And so you have to think in terms of the fact that in wartime, you've got to cripple the entire system. So that's a different world right there. But I think we'd be fools to carry on talking this bullshit, which I'm getting pissed off with, to put it mildly, that it's solar panels and wind farms and we all work together. It's not going to happen, dudes. We're about to enter severe food security, water shortages, droughts, and, you know, this is the first pandemic. This pandemic's not over. It hasn't even started. So and then you chuck in financial collapse, and then you say, like, now you start your activism. But you got to get real, man. It's talking about all this happy clappy, you know, wonderful planet. It's not going to happen, man. We're at the stages where it's like, you know, fighting. We're at the last stand. We're at the end game. So it's like we've got to stop this crap about it's all, you know, bunnies and plant a tree shit. It's nobody's planting a tree when it's going to go up in flames in the coming heat waves and stuff. So it's time to get real, guys. It's time to get real.
Well, I was surprised to hear Eric saying that the pandemic was nearly over, and he mentioned that at the beginning of the interview. He was more or less taking it as a fact that we were kind of over it. Yeah, I've just heard also that Turkey is completely invaded. The Marmara Sea is invaded by another sort of slimy sort of tide all over the coast with a they call it the snot, just a lovely name. And it's apparently, I've looked at some aerial pictures, it's absolutely terrifying. It's not far from where you are, actually, Hugh. It's the other side, but it's not that far. It's the amount of things that are gone completely silent during the pandemic is absolutely incredible. It's lots of people don't know about it here.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's all rather bleak and stuff, but the thing is, you know, I think we should start exploring how other people, this is not new territory, right? This is kind of the norm. If you go back to World War II and read about it, and go back to Sarajevo, Just go and see what everybody else is. I mean, on Corfu here. Just go and see what everybody else has been through. It's the same. We're just about to go through what everybody's been through. So it's not mysterious. It's kind of run of the mill. So it's just, the thing is, like, playtime's over. You had a very nice privileged time. I've been very privileged in my life, but it's like time to wave that goodbye. So the very first thing you can do as an individual is let go. Start letting go. Start letting go of everything, because you're gonna have to let it go. It's basically, what we're heading for is a long process of shedding our delusions, shedding our ideas, shedding our religion. A lot of us are going to have to shed our humanity. So you start early. Start shedding. Start renouncing these things and just letting them go. It's so easier to let them go in your mind, all your cherished things and loved ones in your mind before. And then you get to the stage where every day after that is a gift. So every bit of time you get after that, there's no present like the time. And so once you've let go of everything, while you still have it, it's golden. But you're just a fool if you, right in the middle, you take things for granted. Like, this all turns out well, and, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to be intersectional and inclusive, and have, Biden's going to make some Green New Deal that makes social justice. It's like, guys, forget LGBTQ stuff, forget wokeism and stuff. That's all the kind of privilege you got to let go. There's no social justice. It's like, it's pathetic. It's just plain pathetic. We're going into something like World War II. Can you imagine people in 1939 going around saying, well, the most important thing before we fight Hitler is to be inclusive and to have social justice and to think of the Africans before we start invading Europe? It's like, fuck off. This is serious shit. This is a pitched battle. There's nothing nice about it. Get real, guys. Let that shit go and start to get where we're heading for. If I'm wrong and we don't get there, it doesn't matter. You'll get to wokeism quicker the sooner you start realizing shit's real. So basically, wokeism is saying to the world, shit's not really real. We have time to worry about LGBTQ things like they're equal to the climate crisis. So then you get this debacle like just happened on Collapse, where you have bright green lies somehow is equitable with, feelings of trans people. In what world are you there where feelings of trans people equal the destruction of life on Earth? In what fucking planet are you on? Let that shit go and start concentrating on what Derek and these guys were trying to tell you. It's that. See, the lies we're telling ourselves is that there's nothing really going on. We have plenty of time to be, think about gender and think about women's rights and think about toxic. You don't have time for that. And you will get to the place where people think, behave better in terms of wokeism. If you want people to be woke, first of all, say, we're fucked. There's no hope. Instantly they woke. But while it's a political issue and we ding-donging this, you're broadcasting the fact that there is no emergency. We have time for all this crap. And so then basically people will return that crap in your face. If you say, like, look, if I was the biggest dude for LGBTQ rights and, basically suddenly came into the room and said, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And people would say, why? But that was the biggest thing in your life. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter now because basically, we're heading into a war. There's going to be a draft, and LGBTQ thing doesn't matter. People are going to be raped on the front lines pretty soon. Jessica Lynch's are going to be 10 a penny. So it doesn't really matter about, pay gaps and shit like that. And then instantly people would be like, oh no, they'd be more sympathetic to gay people than ever they were before.
But that's very interesting because that answers a lot of what Mike's question was about how people are poorly equipped to face collapse and resistance, because those are sort of exercises. I've done them before. I've let go of causes when I saw that one was more important and that our planet is more important than some things I was attached to. And to do that with witnesses, to do that in front of people is powerful. It's a powerful psychological tool.
Yeah, you see, the advantages of a cult is that if you have a lot of people working on the world and themselves in this group scenario, if one person makes a breakthrough, they all do, by kind of proxy. So if you can see somebody change, you will change. But if you can see somebody fundamentally break down and change, everybody does. So you get, like, you know, everybody in the group for the price of one.
Yeah, I found that interesting because I always thought there needs to be, I feel like, especially groups like us, and we're so spread apart that we're just one individual. And I always saw the individual versus the group. It's how can one individual influence a group, you know? And I've always thought about that. It's very difficult. I mean, speaking from my experience, living in a city, at first the city is the most vulnerable to climate change. Once things go, most vulnerable to collapse, pandemics, and I see that they're in need of this kind of change. Especially, it's just inevitable. You know, they need this change is most necessary. So yeah.
Yeah. So, but you see, it's early days, right? For us, they can string this along quite a long time, I think. So you have to imagine, you know, extrapolate forward. Today we're just a bicycle club, but extrapolate forward in the future where one of us gets arrested or killed or beaten up, or so, you know, basically, and suddenly gets real like that. Well, you know, that's it doesn't matter that we're all distributed around the world. We'll be as close as maggots as when that kind of thing happens. So yeah, also don't forget. I mean, I'm just learning what's possible in the new world and on social media and stuff like that. But I'm being impressed and by what you can achieve. I thought that you had to do it personally. It's like pheromones, and you have to be in the same room. I didn't know that you could actually get into people's skin and cross a digital divide. And so I'm learning that it's especially because people are more sensitive these days, and you know, there are a lot of lurkers, right? So you don't know. A lot of people will sit on the sidelines. In fact, only about 1% of people will contribute. So you think there are about 7 of us, and look, there are about maybe 700 members on you know, just lurking around, just you know, few hundred views and stuff on videos, and so you see all those guys are also part of it, emotionally vested in it. So basically, if it doesn't matter if something happens, a change happened in us, it can ripple out much wider to maybe, you know, hundreds of people. It's strange because you don't really want any of this to be more than like a Dunbar's numbers worth. You know, it's you know, if you think about it, it has the, you know, guys like Jordan Peterson and that, they have hundreds of thousands of followers. Some of these guys have millions. But, you know, for this kind of work and stuff, I'm not sure it works on that scale. I always took it as read that you do this kind of thing in about a tribal level, you know, less than 250 people, 150 to 250 people. It's a small company of people. And you don't want to start a religion, you don't want to change the world and stuff. This is just, you know, a lifeboat for everybody involved. And you see, and there's that, and also the speaking the truth as best you can has strange effects. So it's not just the intersubjectivity synchronicity telephone, is that we all live in a lie. And if somebody has the strength to root out the lie in themselves and admit it and take some pain giving it up and do that publicly, that can have very big effects. I mean, we're talking, you know, I mean, in history, people have done it, and thousands of years down the road, there's still repercussions from those what seemed like simple acts at the time. So you've got to be conscious of the fact that if you start to tell the truth as best you can, it has its own power, and it can be very powerful and very long-lasting. But you don't want to seek that out as a goal. You know, that's against the Desiderata principles to look for those kind of outcomes. You just do right action. And the right action is to try and tell the truth as best you can. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing tonight, is just telling people, guys, get real. We're not going to be doing this activism and movements and create movements. I mean, it's not going to happen. It's just not happening. That is a quaint time, and it's passé. It's passé in 2020, right? All the things XR was doing, that was a time that's passed. Those tactics, those ideas, they all passed, right? The situation has moved on way before that. We're about 20 years, 30 years behind the times than the average person, as far as I can see. And we have to catch up and get ahead of the curve if you want to, you know, basically save yourself some pain.
Yeah, that's really good. That's yeah, because if we're thinking about, I guess, hospice, there's a lot of people, you know, if we're at that level, there's a lot of ways to look at it. Some people might want to change the world, and then some people, maybe they'll think, okay, it's better to just do right action and tell the truth as best you can. I think you hit it in the nail there, because yeah.
Well, people are trying to avoid grief, right? And so it's like, well, guys, 10 billion people dying horribly, is the horror of it's going to echo across the Milky Way. So it's like, just start eating the grief now. Don't eat it all in one day. It'll overwhelm you. So the guys that commit suicide and do all these dramatic things and stuff is they're overwhelmed. And so it's like, start eating the shit now. Start grieving now and avoid the rush. Yeah. And so hospice could be the best part, man. It's like, I tell you, the shit show that's been going on has been so low grade entertainment. It's like it can only get better from here. But you have to get the kind of mindset where you find the drama entertaining and not threatening. And the only way I know you can get to there is by ditching your ego. So if you hang on to your ego, you're not going to have a very nice fairground ride. You're only really going to enjoy the fairground if you're completely reckless and you think like, you know, I'm a kamikaze. I'm just going to enjoy every single moment of every single ride, and I don't care if the ride kills me. And if you have that attitude, not only is it less probable you'll get killed, but it's more probable you'll actually enjoy it. But most people will think you're a nut because they think like, how can you be enjoying this? And you say, well, who can't enjoy this show? It's like the price of entry is your pain at birth and the pain at exit, and all the rest is gravy. So it's just like, who can't think they're not getting their money's worth out of this show? Think of what we do. Think of what we're doing in places like the UK, where they trying to amass quantity of life without any quality. So the problem with domestication and this fetishization of safety and non-violence and stuff is you get to this place where quantity of life becomes paramount, and you're not living anymore, and your quality of life is going down tremendously. And you say, like, well, just give up on some of the safety and security and just give up on trying to accumulate time and start living. Just, you know, That's the price of living, is giving up on safety and security and nice things.
Yeah, and I just want to point this out. Maybe Sophie can speak more about it, but the medical profession, how they want to extend your life even to the point where you're in a gurney, strapped up by these machinery, these things that help you breathe. And at some point you think that's not a good quality of life. And they promote that, or they say, hey, you know, you want to give your granny 2 more months to live or something. And I don't know, I just find that kind of sickening, you know.
That starts from birth, unfortunately, because I started working when I was in obstetrics and delivery wards and in labor wards, and then after that in neonatology, and where they were keeping alive tiny little babies that were sometimes 25 weeks, 30. That's when I started to ask myself all these questions that you're mentioning now, and I was only in my 30s then. And all through the time I've worked in medicine, I've seen this creeping all the time. I've abandoned all that without any regrets, without any, I mean, it's just, it's in every aspect of the health system. You cannot, of course, no, it won't happen if somebody comes in with a broken leg and you're going to fix that leg. That's still fantastic work, you know. Or it won't happen if you do a delivery and you help a woman, you do midwifery, you do normal. But it's I'm talking about this with my neighbors, with my family, the people who are still working in the health system, and all I can do, as you were saying earlier, the right thing is to tell the truth. And I just come out bluntly with what we're talking about. Do you really want to live until 90, a shit life? Why don't you want to die at the normal age of 70 or 60 or whatever? Because what do you want? What do you want? Quality, quantity. It's the same. I'm having this language, and most people I'm talking to are people who used to be my patients. And I used to just sometimes be obliged to I had to sometimes send them to hospital, or under the pressure of algorithm and of medical counsel, prescribe things that I didn't want to. I have suffered in that thing, but I know now I will never collude, and I will never go back to that. Never. And I make the people around me very, very aware of that. But it's, yeah.
It's so important that you brought it up, because this is my dark fear. If you don't think I've got enough dark fears, then listen to this one. Because, okay, let's just paint the picture more of what you said about in America. In America, it's got to the stage where really they can keep anybody alive for as long as you want. It's just basically they can keep you alive like a steak, and just there's so many machines and stuff. So where we've got to is that people are kept alive until they make the decision with their left brain, the alien cortex, to switch off the machine. So it's a ridiculous situation where a third of all the money spent on healthcare in America is going for people in end-of-life care. That means that the doctors know that this person is effectively dead, but they carry on trying procedures, trying stuff, doing machines and stuff. And what they're doing is they're draining people's healthcare, and they're draining their bank accounts and of the survivors. So all they're doing is sucking money out of people's wallets, because the people cannot let go of that loved one and admit that they're already dead and just being kept alive by machines. So the doctors they're not really cruel, because they, in their minds, they know what the situation is. They're kind of lying, because they never tell anybody this is bullshit, you might as well switch this machine off. They never say that. They always leave it to the family, and the family just carries on trying stupid shit, which the doctors go along with because it's profitable. And then basically until they drain the money, and then basically when the family has drained all their resources, they've drained their healthcare, their medical insurance, and then they're finally ready to let go. So basically, a third of all medical treatment money spent on healthcare in America is being flushed down the toilet for no reason other than the family cannot accept death. Now, that's that situation, but here's where it really gets dark. What scares the bejesus out of me is we're rapidly getting to the stage where that applies to the whole planet. The planet can get to the stage where it is effectively on life support system, and they can keep it alive with a dead planet alive, just like a dead person in an ICU. They can do it indefinitely with geoengineering. It's artificial. They know the planet's dead. They know they'll never be able to recover it, but you can almost keep it just doing all these kind of end of life stupid treatments, just carry on doing that indefinitely with the planet. I don't want to get to there. And the reason why we must sabotage the system is this vision that I have of we don't want that amount of control. We don't want, you see, we've got too much control over the patient's life. We don't, all our pursuit of healthcare and people's fear about death, and so they like every new procedure that they could do, every breakthrough in healthcare, everybody thought it was a good thing because now we're living longer and stuff like that. But we're getting closer and closer to the place where everything is controlled and managed to the point where we're only alive because we don't elect to switch a switch off. You don't want to get to there. It's a nightmare to get to there. To have to make that decision, there are some decisions that need to be left to the fates. And we've got to a position where we can't beat the fates, but we can't concede to them either. So we're in this stalemate, just like a patient in an ICU. And the planet is going to get there with geoengineering. So they're going to be keeping the planet alive, and they say, like, we can do it. This is agony. No one's enjoying living under a climate managed by geoengineers. It'll be hell. You'll watch the seas dying. There'll be pH would be wrecking the phytoplankton. Then they'll be altering the pH. It's basically an Orwellian dystopia of infinitely horrendous proportions. And they'll be in a position, we'll all be in a position where you say, we can end at any time. We can just stop geoengineering and the pain will end. And no one will want to do it. No one will want to flick the switch. No one will want to basically end life on Earth. No one will want to carry on geoengineering. We'll be exactly in the position where all these families in America find themselves with the healthcare industry. And what is obvious, what everybody will do, we'll just go on and on and on till we've drained all our resources. Nothing else can happen other than sterilization of this planet. And that's where we're heading for. So what we need to do is to take that delusion of control out of our hands. Is we need to try and end this system before we have the ability to keep the planet alive on a life support system. We need to get to the place where either the planet lives or dies. You see, one of the things why we've got to this position and why people get to this with the healthcare industry is selfishness. You see, you're not supposed to look after your life so much. It's an aberration to value your own life so much that you will drain the finances from your family and while you sit there in a terminal condition. You're supposed to give up some of your life and pass it on. And now none of these people will do it. We've got so selfish, you know, we celebrate LGBTQ rights. And I'll tell you what's wrong with LGBTQ rights is that it's a wrong not to put yourself first and not to procreate and pass some of your life on to your kids. We are genetically designed, all living organisms are, to sacrifice some of themselves for continuation of life of others. But we got to the stage where we're so selfish to our own life that we'll do anything. We'll bankrupt the planet, we'll bankrupt future generations, we'll bankrupt all our loved ones and our families, just so we can squeeze out a little more of the shittiest quality of life that you can do. And what you're supposed to do is give up your life for others.
But you know what the Inuit used to do, and you probably, or the Eskimos, how they used to call them when I was young. When the elderly passed a certain age, the elderly used to go away from the group with a skin of some animal to sit on, and let himself die on the ice, because he was not going to be any good to the group. He was going to drain their energy, their space. It was going to pollute probably their igloo. And it was just in the culture. You just left and you went to sleep in the cold and the snow. And
in most indigenous cultures. In most indigenous cultures. So
of course.
So Jared Diamond tells the story about these guys who in Africa, I can't remember which tribe it was, but anyway, one of these ethnic peoples in Africa, and the same thing is they left this guy with a gourd of water. He got too sick. He's old guy. He's ready to die. So they leave him under a bush. They're nomadic, so they have to keep moving. So they leave him to die under a bush, and then basically he didn't die. All the vultures came and sat on the tree above him, and they all shat on him, and he wouldn't die. And the vultures are carrion birds, so they wouldn't eat him until he died. But eventually he got better. He got up and came and caught up with the tribe. The tribe afterwards, they were mean to him. From then on, they called him, vulture shit, because he was, by the time he got to them, he had all this vulture shit on him. So they called him vulture shit guy. And they were really mean to him because he didn't stay there and die. He came and caught up with the tribe, and then he could put the tribe at a lot of risk. So it's pathetic. We shouldn't be doing this. But you see, look what's happening. We have a chance now that we haven't passed all the tipping points, and we can pass life on to future generations. But that's a closing window, and it's closing very fast. So instead of talking about social justice and stuff for that, we should be talking about how can we sacrifice ourselves now so that some people, the future, can carry on. And nobody's talking about that. But we should have a militant culture that whenever any shit like Monbiot or some fuckwit gets on TV or something and says well, we need social justice, say, fuck social justice. What are you doing so that you die and people can may allow other people to live? And unless you're having that conversation, shut the fuck up about solar panels and wind farms and quality of life and people in the global south. It's like, we're all going to die. If you don't fucking say what you're going to die for today, tell me how you're going to die so that others can live. Otherwise, shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear about Green New Deals. That's a powerful sermon for today, eh? I must have been ticked off by the previous meeting. I am ticked off by the previous meeting. I can almost hear the lie. I can hear the falsehood, the denial. It swims like a miasma. It really
I think
gets
we all
me.
do. I think we all do here. I think this is why we're there, because we can, we can speak the truth, and because the parallel with geoengineering and keeping people alive is so powerful, because it's the same denial of death, and people who are denying the death of our planet. I mean, people who are denying what they have in front of their eyes at the moment. It's exactly the same thing, and but you have to say that. You have to say it loud and clear. I hope all the people who are listening to this, the lurkers, the hundreds or whatever who are there, can just broadcast this. But
Right. But
Yeah, I mean,
what's
whoever
dangerous?
says that about LGBTQ, and I mean, to defend Derek and Leah and that about trans people and that, and say it's like, okay, so you're trans, that's very cool for you, but explain to me, what have you done for other people? You haven't, like, the fact that you're not going to have kids and not going to procreate doesn't make room for other people or anything like that. It's bullshit. Or it's like, what have you really done for future generations? You don't give a shit about future generations. That's why you cut your dick off. So basically, if you cut your reproduction organs off because of your gender identity, it's like, that's great for you, but like, what about other people? What about other people?
But it's not
It's not
only
an
that.
argument to say
It's
that you made space.
unsustainable to be like that without the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the medical health system. It's impossible to, like Derek was saying in the last talk that I listened to. I missed it, but he was saying, well, you know, if you brought up a child, telling him, a child who likes to dress up as a girl, and why not? You know, he's just a child who likes a boy who likes to dress up as a girl. That's fine. But when you start down the road of intervening surgically and giving hormones constantly, because I have had to prescribe some to trans people, they take an enormous amount of estrogens, progesterone, and stuff like that. You know, they depend totally on the industry. As for the surgery, it's extremely high tech. The surgeons are making a fortune on these people. So these people are completely a product of this disgusting culture we live in. They would not be. They're nearly artificial. They're nearly artificial life, because you stop the industrial system. You stop the possibility for these people to even exist as trans people. They probably have to live as people who have preferences and maybe have to in society adapt like people adapted 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. There was always effeminate men and masculine women who in their ways became Amazons or dancers, but they didn't go for the knife, or if they had to, they were eunuchs for the court of the harems of the kings. But you know, there was not this, that it's totally artificial. I have the three I had in my practice were kept literally as they were, with prescriptions constantly, visits to hospitals, substitutes for all sorts of things, and also psychological support, because those people went regularly into terrible depressions and all sorts of problems due to all sorts of things, probably their previous history, but their stigma, their place in society. So they were taking antidepressants, hormones, and visits to. It's just those wouldn't. I was looking at these people as a kind of I mean, people, I respected them, I liked them. I knew they lived in the community, but they were, you know, I mean, in my family, there's a lot of diabetics. Well, people have lived as diabetics because their insulin was invented in 1930 something, so late, I think. But if they wouldn't be my family, because they would be dead if they had been born before. They'd all be dead at 14 or 20 because they didn't have insulin. It's this. I'm looking at those people the same way. You're just there because there's this big machine behind. But you know, that's all.
Yeah. Rather than telling kids about how they should be tolerant and stuff, is I would like to see them say, like, look, I don't see that this technical civilization and industrial civilization has much longer to go. So do you really want to be a hostage to it? Because as a trans person, you're going to be reliant on big pharma and stuff. And I can well see a collapse, maybe very soon, of the market system and free market capitalism, in which case big pharma might not be around. I don't see big pharma around in the Weimar Republic and stuff, basically churning out high-priced drugs and stuff to keep you that you might need. So you should be saying to these kids, like, do you really want to be a hostage? Because you're making yourself a hostage to the industrial system, which we need to shut down. We don't need more people dependent on this industrial system as a crime. So we should be going the other way and say, look, we need to get you off the dependence on this, military, industrial, scientific healthcare complex. And so I would not like to tell somebody that's prepubescent that I can guarantee that the grid and the industrial system is going to be here for all the decades in your life. In fact, I'll tell you right now that I'd give that almost zero chance. So do you want to take such an irrevocable step? It just makes you less resilient and makes you more dependent on on a system that in itself is in a death spiral.
And it makes you also kicked out of the medical profession, because if you utter this sort of affirmation to somebody in a consultation, and you say, well, you know, I know you want to be a woman, but I'm sorry, but you know, you're going to have to do it without surgery and medications, because the medical system is going to collapse in a few years. That person will go up to a lawyer, or it will go up to the medical council, and you'll be kicked out of your job. It's, you know,
Yeah,
it's just like,
yeah. Well,
you know?
That's why nobody ought to be a doctor these days. It's just too much burden.
I
But
remember at one meeting I was asking that naive question of Lord Hugh about consequences to this, transgender operations, and he said, "Of course, yes. There's all kinds of medical complications afterwards, and like Sophie said, psychological support. Um, but my one big thing too, aside from those complications, are it's almost, how one of the things we're always talking about is striving to get rid of our egos. And it seems that such a step like that, it seems like it's so focused on the ego being bound up in your physical or material manifestation on this planet. It seems like being so obsessed with that, and that's all your life would be about. I don't know.
yeah, it's become a political agenda. So it's outside. It's cult-like now. So it's become a cult. But I looked at the research of consequences, and I found that there were 78 papers. There was a meta study that said they had 78 studies on the results of gender surgery, and they said basically not a single one of them found any negative consequences from having gender surgery at any age, even like little kids. And like right there, there's something wrong, because I know lots of people that have regrets from basically being trans. So the fact that anecdotally I know people that are having regrets about being trans doesn't means that there's some agenda. That's 78 studies, and that's obvious. Is obviously the only people that do gender studies and long-term impact studies of gender surgery. The only people that do that are people that have an agenda and have an interest in promoting gender surgery and trans issues. So it's basically that's the only thing that can account for such a glaringly bogus result.
There is vested interest, because those studies are completely there. I've studied that years ago too, and the first studies that were published, that was showing the amount of breast cancer in men who had to take hormones for a long time to become a woman, and all sorts of other problems with the prostate of these guys that is left in, because you can't take out the prostate even if you cut off the penis. His prostate has to stay in. So those guys cumulate the problems of female hormones with the problems of taking female hormones on a male. It's just, there's problems, cardiovascular problems due to the taking of hormones. There's weight problems. There is all sorts. I mean, I could go into a list, but all these things have been published, let's say, when it was not happening so often in the beginning of the 2000s. And now you don't find this anymore. Well, there's no studies. Of course, they do the psychological ones a little bit. You find little papers in journals of psychiatry, but they all rely heavily on the social pressure to the LGBT group, and they say that, but it's enormous. And those people not only are taking the poor people, I feel sorry for them, but are relying on the pharmaceutical industry, but also become a burden to the health system afterwards, because they have all sorts of pathologies, and then they just, it becomes a crazy problem.
In previous times,
poor Derek, I feel sorry for Derek and Leah, really, because they're so right, they're so right where they are, like.
But so in previous times, then people knew about it. I mean, in Christianity, I mentioned like the Gali and Sibylese Corybantes and that would castrate themselves. But it was known since ancient times, and in more recent times, the Skopjes. Christians have always had a problem with self-castration, because it's a Christianity is a death cult. And the primary reason, I think, for the psychology of trans is also a kind of a death cult. It's a denial of yourself as an organic human being that's going to procreate in a lot of ways. A bit simplistic, but at least I know some people where that's the case. It's a control issue. And but people like the sculptures and the Christian cults in Russia, they had tremendous trouble with Tsar and stuff. They had terrible penalties for them, but they couldn't stop it. I think that the sculpture is still alive today, but the men and women that would the women would cut off their breasts, and the men would cut off their scrotum and penis, and it was a big deal. It was a growing cult. But anybody, in some places, I think in Belgrade or something, that I think the taxi drivers or the horse taxis or something like that, they were primarily sculptures. And you can see writers talking about them. They say that they look horrible. Sculptures, their skin is pallid and kind of waxy, and they're all a bit overweight, and it's not nice to touch them. They're kind of clammy and kind of reptilian. And so, and they're well known. I mean, everybody knew since ancient times that they're well known problems. And one of them is like mood swings, and the other one is like obsession about food and, putting on weight and stuff. So they're real consequences that nobody will talk about. There's a whole industry of self-cutters, especially in the gay circuit and the clubbing scene. A large number of these operations are done in back rooms by guys who get known as cutters, and they basically do it for money and for sexual thrills. So it's an element of sadomasochism in it. And a lot of these guys, all they want to do is have an orgasm and then have their balls cut off when they have an orgasm, because that's supposed to be the biggest orgasm you're ever going to get. And so they get obsessed by this, sadomasochistic fetish, which is an erotic fetish of having their balls cut off. And they're not thinking what it's going to be like afterwards living as a eunuch. And nobody will tell them that. So a lot of people get obsessed by this, and it's a sexual eroticism thing, and it's got nothing to do with desire to be a female or anything like that. It's basically it's a kind of a suicide, and so it's just one moment of sexual thrill, and that's their last, and then they've got fucking medical problems for the rest of their lives. But nobody will say anything about that or expose that culture that's going on, because basically it's not politically correct.
But you see, Hugh, in the past, there's been eunuchs because they were the guardians of the women in the Orient, and in China, and Arab countries, yes. And there's been the castrats too, who were the singers in big choirs a long time ago, so that they kept their beautiful voice. So they were castrated, so that there's some famous ones actually they were actually revered. But all that was happening in a time where there was not an industry, where there's a certain industry, but it was very small scale, and it was for a certain purpose. But the problem I have now, I wouldn't go into the sexuality and the erotism of all this thing, because I don't understand all this, but my problem is we have created a group of people who are completely artificially kept alive by an industry that we loathe and that is dangerous by all its aspects that we've discussed. And you can't advise a young man or a young woman, especially a young man now, to go into this now at this stage, knowing that in a few years he's going to probably become a nothing, because he's going to start having beard growing again and hair, because he won't be able to take hormones, and he's going to have all sorts of problems because he won't have a surgeon to do this or that, to arrange this or that. That's the job, is to tell, as Hugh said, young people now, you're not going to have support from the medical world in a few years. Everything is going to go around. Don't do it. It's not for any ethical reasons or opinions. It's just practically you're going into a failure.
Yeah, you
Did you
might
follow
have to
me?
leave an urban environment. You might have to become a refugee and stuff. Just don't think your white privilege is going to last through collapse. So you want to make sure that you've got less problems, not more. But anyway, the whole thing is stupid because they keep on going on and on about the plasticity of the human brain. Well, the human body is not plastic. So why does the human body take the hit if you have gender dysphoria when the human brain is easier to change? The human brain is plastic and you can change it. So why don't people change the brain? Why is that so politically incorrect? Because the body's not plastic. You do damage to the body. So, but again, it's the alien cortex. The alien cortex gets a gender identity. It's what it really is that the alien cortex has an ego, and I think one of the reasons why culturally we're having this fad of trans and gender surgery and stuff is because there's a growing sense in the world that there needs to be transition and change. You can feel that you can just feel in the air that there is this almost pregnancy, this pregnant pause just waiting for this kind of cloudburst and transition into something new. And it's expressing itself in all these perversions of transition. Because what I'm saying is, like, the alien cortex is always substitute and inverts. And so basically we're about to go through a transformation of the alien cortex. And it doesn't want to do it because it's an ego and it's going to die. The end of that transformation is its death. But so what it does is it substitutes. It says, no, transformation means that in essence, you're a woman. And so you've got to basically do a gender transition. You say, no, that's makyo. That's a false imposition of transition. And then they say, well, we're going to do a transition into the singularity of the nerds. And then the Christians do, well, we're going to do the rapture. And everybody's got a fake substitution of the transition. And they're all in denial of what the transition is. The transition is that part that's making all these fucked up impositions and doing these suppositions where they say, superposition, saying, well, you know, it's a gender transformation, it's an ego transformation, and so it's an alien cortex transformation, and the alien cortex dies or we go extinct. So get the transition right. It's an intellectual, psychological transition, and it has the characteristics of psychosis. So we're all going into psychosis. There's no avoiding it. We're going through mass psychosis. And the way it's fragmenting is, well, maybe I'll do this psychosis, I'll do that. No, there's one psychosis that makes you survive, and that's the proper rebirth into a new world, which is eupsychosis. And it's a good psychosis. It's a psychosis where no one gets hurt, your body doesn't get altered, and basically you come out the other side without an ego. You identify then with the universe, and you stop being an individual. So the individual is going through paroxysms of writhing and denial and every which way, from every which way to deny that this birth is going to happen. And you say, well, it can be an abortion or it can be a birth, but we're heading for an abortion. So get over it, man. Just do the right kind of psychosis. Well, that maybe ended that conversation. Should we end it there? Or does anybody want to say something?
Oh, I was going to say something, but you all probably covered this already. One of the things Lee or Keith said about what's going on with transgenderism, I think it's right. And I think you went over it a little bit, Hugh, is people are trying to conform to the gender roles of the culture because they feel the cultural pressure, I think. So if, a guy wants to do more feminine things, the culture tells him he must be a woman, then he identifies with that. And yeah, so I think that's a big part of this issue going on. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's getting so faddish. At the moment, it's just people are doing it just because it's exciting and interesting. And it's a bit boring and basic to be cisgender. Terrible place to get to. I mean, but that's where you get to when it's all about egos and individuality and me, and they're like, oh well, this is where it gets to. We're going to do this with at a genetic level. We'll soon start tinkering with our genes to conform with that, and then you're like, oh, mother of God,
Yeah,
you
it's
can't
like
tinker
that.
with your genes. Give you X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, dudes.
Yeah, that sounds like the road to cancer. And another thing is like that video of Joseph Campbell I put up. Stories are about getting the mind in line with what the body wants, and I don't think the body wants to be sliced up with a scalpel.
Yeah, I mean, surely a normal body wants to generate, wants to procreate. It's like, come on, man. Surely our minds cannot have become this dominant. We need it. Basically, I would love to talk to McGilchrist because I can't imagine what he would say about a subject like this. But he's skirting on the edge of it. That basically, the emissary and our master and the emissary, which emissary I call the alien cortex, it needs to be subordinated. It cannot. We don't want to carry on anymore with it supreme.
Have you tried to reach out to Ian?
Oh,
Because I've seen that he's given interviews to some little stations and groups. I mean, little channels on YouTube that don't have many
yeah.
views.
So
Because I don't think his book is sold much, so I think he might be happy to.
yeah,
I don't
I've
know.
been in contact with his assistant, and he's interested in having a meeting with us, but I'm still setting a date. So looking, yeah, since you're talking about Ian McGilchrist, so just wait. Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. There's so many people that see a similar thing from different angles. But yeah, it's just moving too slow. It's just, I mean, no, I'm not meaning the McGilchrist interview. I mean the fact that people's psychology is not moving fast enough. Is the events in the world are overtaking human psychology at a very fast pace. And I think in terms of the Eric McVeigh conversation is you need to take that into account. People think of activism like a static target, and they think it's going to be like it is today in 2019, and we'll just do a bit of activism for subsidies for green tech and stuff. It's like, guys, one thing you can absolutely take to the bank is it's not going to be like it is today. It's probably going to be a lot worse, and shit is going to be coming down the pike much, much faster than you'll be able to cope with it. So if you've got some plan for activism, you have to take into account that you're going to be doing activism on a high wire with basically the waves smacking your face one after another. It's going to be a brutal beating. So it's no longer MLK and stuff. It's like, okay, if I get MLK, make him run across a hot fire with bullets firing left and right, beat him with a stick, and then basically make him do a triathlon afterwards. It's like, that's the kind of activism you want to be doing, but not Gandhi. it's like this is Gandhi in a liquidizer tap dancing his way. This is more like activism today. So yeah, everybody's just got to shake up their ideas and just move on, because I just see everybody so static, so behind in their thinking, talking like it's the 70s and stuff. It's like, guys, the 70s weren't even the 70s. So just move on, for fuck's sake. We can't be doing a shitty rerun of the 1970s in the 2020s. We just cannot. Just go and read up on what happened in the 1970s. Just don't repeat all that shit. It failed miserably in the 1970s. We've got far less time than they had in the 1970s. Just get over that and just catch up to where we're at. And it's dire. The clock is ticking, man. So anyway, that's my message. Better go out on that one then.
I don't know if everybody knows this, but the in the United States, the hospitals are run by corporations, so not good.
Everything's run by corporations now.
Mhm.
Governments are run by corporations. Armies are run by corporations. And that's a good thing to think about. Think in terms of, okay, before you set out to do, let's do a campaign of banner drops, or we can stop fossil fuel infrastructure. Stop that shit. Imagine this scenario. We're at war, right? Basically a proxy war in Iran. There's a draft. They're sending people to the front to keep them off the streets because they're bread riots. And then basically you say, now you start doing activism. Now what can you achieve in that environment? Because that's more like what you're going to be in. And say, like, it's a corporate environment. Basically, a lot of the people will be Blackwater and all of these kind of corporations, that it'll be as a semi-corporatized army. So it's not just the US military. There'll be legions of mercenaries. I don't call them mercenaries now, but they are. So think of a corporatized war with chuck in a bit of food insecurity and hyperinflation after, say, a collapse of the financial system. And now start talking about what you're going to do to reduce carbon and methane and greenhouse gases. That's far more realistic. So start with that. And first thing is, banner drops get you 10 years in jail, hung upside down, whipped on your feet. So don't do banner drops, because you don't do banner drops during wartime. I'm telling you that much. It's insurrection. You fight, but you don't fight like a fool. So there's a bit of food for thought. Definitely lost all the XR crowd on that. But anyway, if you're part of XR UK, you're on an island with 64 million people. It only feeds half of them. You are a refugee crisis waiting to happen. Just remember that. Just remember that.
I got a quick question. This is about that XR symbol. I saw it. I watched a film on Friday, the 10 billion film. Do you remember that with Stephen Emmett from 2015?
Yeah.
It was in there as a subliminal message. Near the start, he starts talking, and then it's showing all footage of, because he's going through, layer by layer, the problems with the human species. Now, that guy was, I don't know, is he like a scientist in the Microsoft Foundation? But he's looking at existential threat that the human species face. And that fucking symbol was there. It just popped up on the screen. I was like, this is 2015. Yeah. Watch it.
That's extraordinary.
It's on YouTube. You have to pay for it, though, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, it was there in bold. It was just like, and it was a subliminal because it just flashed up in between all these pictures of, like floods and chaos and climate change.
So that makes sense. So it's a street artist called.
Oh yes, yeah.
I can't remember what his name. Yeah, but it's not Banksy, but it's somebody like Banksy. It could be Banksy, but he's not claiming it. But anyway, that was started in 2011, and that guy shopped that symbol around a lot to try and get people to pick it up. No one would pick it up. He did get some success, so that's where it must come from. But eventually in 2018, he loaned it to XR. But there's one of the Greta videos I did. I went over that symbol, and it's really interesting, the background to it.
Yeah, it just had me thinking. I just suddenly thought, is this like, the sort of foundations of XR being infiltrated, or the sort of, is XR just a whole?
Not at that stage.
Yeah.
No, not at that stage. That was too early. But I mean, certainly now they're completely infiltrated, I think. But yeah, it's. But the thing is, it's not too late to movement jacket back again, right? These things can be turned. But yeah, Gary mentions something about making sigils for each one of the desiderata, and I kind of snowed him a bit by saying it's an excellent idea, but you know, I as usual gilded the lily a bit and made it too much of a huge task. But sigils and symbols like that, basically what I was talking to Gary about was, you know, vesting the sigil. So you basically put a lot of psychic energy into it and work a lot on it, its emotional development. And it can be very psychically powerful after that if you do that. So these symbols are very, very powerful. And I mean, the XR symbol, the name Extinction Rebellion and the symbol the XR symbol is pretty much all the organization is. It's nothing more than that. But a symbol like that is super powerful. So yeah, I'll just say that because we should, at some stage, if we get the ARG going, we should invest a lot of time in sigils and the meaning behind those things.
Yeah, I mean, thinking along those lines, you guys were talking about Easter Island last week, I think, and that had me thinking about how I remember watching a documentary about all of that, you know, the Birdman cult, and how even though they knew you know, the last person to chop the last tree down on Easter Island, they must have known, like, you know, this is crazy, but they did it anyway to build something for one of those statues or whatnot. But I always remember in the film, it was like, this is like an allegory or a metaphor for Earth. You know, it was an island in the middle of the ocean, and they used all their resources and they had nothing left. And, you know, they died. It was like Earth, an island, you know, in the middle of the solar system. You know, so it's
but
similar.
Consider this. Everybody's a bit of a magical thinker and stuff. Now imagine if you were a shaman. You could have saved all those people, even with sigils and symbology. You just basically invest people with a religious symbol or something. And you can carve it into every tree. You say whoever cuts down this tree will be cursed. And then basically, you know, a sigil like that could save the forest. You know, that's how fucking stupid people are. But the fact that they can be stupid one way means that there's hope for them being stupid another. So that's why, you know, like I mentioned, cults to Eric McBain got a very negative reaction. But it's like people don't like to admit that they all cults, they're all suckers for cults. And so shamans are outside of the cult system, and they use cults to manipulate people, just like states use psyops and all these programs to manipulate us. But people are super manipulative, easy to manipulate. So, but for the righteous outside the skull and bones and all those, you know, Neoplatonists, that's you know, it's a salvation also, that we could also save the planet with those symbols. I mean, just think how powerful a symbol is. If you got the XR symbol and everybody knew that okay, you just set up this as a known meme in the public, that the XR symbol, if it appears on some machine, that machine will be blown up within a week. Just imagine how powerful that is, you know, putting XR symbols on things after that.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that.
Sorry, did you say a shaman was outside? A shaman was outside the cult so that he could manipulate them. A shaman is supposed to have shed his ego. So somebody who's shed his ego, what's his situation vis-a-vis cults? Because he can't even. I mean, I'm trying to.
So a cult, the real purpose of a cult is for rebirth, spiritual rebirth.
Yeah.
So what the shamans would do was they would take people on a magical mystery tour. Basically, they would take them on the journey across the Styx, basically, just through death. So they would take them on that, and they would do it in a thing like a cave or something like that, with the idea that death is really a rebirth. And so you would go through this ritual death, which was, in psychological terms, it was a complete death. And then, you know, they would lead people out. After that, they're revenants. They've been born again. Because they've died, but they're still living, then they are revenants. But you see, the shamans have already been through that process. They've already met all the demons and been through all the psychology. so then they can lead other people through that. The reason it has, I don't want to labor too much the thing about all the paranormal stuff, but I keep on pecking away at it. It's hugely unpopular, especially on the left. They don't like paranormal shit, UFOs and stuff. But the problem is, you have to get into that stuff, and the reason is that's all inside us. So those things will manifest on this journey. Those things will manifest. So the fact that I'm playing the role of a shaman means that I have to introduce those things to you, because you will see them. If you look at, say, a Buddhist priest doing a funeral rite, in part of the Book of the Dead and the Bardo, they will tell you that you will see all the demons. You will see, and they say, know that they're all projections of your own mind. So that all of these paranormal things, what I believe is happening with the UFOs and the US Navy and stuff, they are the projection of our own mind. We're manifesting these things. And the more you go into this, the more you will manifest them. Just remember that they come from your own mind. It doesn't make them any less real. It's straight out of that Harry Potter thing, where Harry Potter says, like, Professor, is this all happening inside my mind? He goes, of course it is, Harry. Why should that make it any less real? And that's exactly the way it is. You'll never separate out what comes out as a hallucination of your mind and what really exists outside. So just forget it. Just say it's all just those ghosties exist. You're going to meet them. And then basically just a shaman can tell you what to do with each one of them. And I can do that when you're ready and you want to know, especially if you start seeing things, then I'll tell you what to do and how to deal with each one of them. But just whenever you're ready.
I'm sorry I interrupted you, Tom. Sorry for that now.
No problem. No, don't worry.
Well, did that exhaust? I feel like I'm wearing everybody out. Did I exhaust all the questions for tonight?
No, there's too many, and it's been so long. We're going on to another subject now. I think we need a break, all right? But that could go on forever.
Yeah, I mean,
one day we should just go for 8 hours straight, like David Icke. 24 hours.
I do want to say something you guys might find interesting. So when I was in boot camp, like the first or second week when I was in Air Force boot camp, like the EC monitors, entry control monitors, screwed up and had me on EC duty for a week. So a week straight, I got no sleep. And like the 6th or 7th day of that week, when I was doing the 40-minute run, I had like a semi out of body experience where everything turned into haze, but my body was on autopilot, so I was still running, and I saw hundreds of wolves running around me. It was fucking trippy, and I will never forget that.
Yeah, you see, and you'll never separate out whether they really were there or not. Because you see, it gets weirder than that. If you can see things like that, and you can see, you can tell yourself, yeah, I'm just imagining things, and it was a trippy experience, and so the wolves are not there. But you wait until other people see it and shit like that. Then you're fucked. There's nowhere to go after that. So, yeah. No one knows what the hell's going on with the human mind. I tell you, no one knows what the hell's going on anywhere in this universe. If anybody thinks they know what, I mean, I'll tell you what's not going on, but I don't know what the fuck is going on. And what's not going on is what all the scientists and Michael Shermer's tell you. I'll tell you, definitely that isn't what's going on.
Yeah, it's like, we'll never know what's going on, but it's still pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah. It's just you just have to bow down and worship it. It's just so fucking amazing. It's just divine, glorious. So it's, you know, it's. I mean, can you think of anything better than something that you could study it as much as you like, and it would just yield new and fascinating insights, and it would never stop. So I believe science is infinite. And these idiots are idiots because they think science is finite. You say, you stupid idiots, you don't know your own subject.
it's the never-ending story, and this culture is trying to have the last page or the last word, and you can't do that. That's fucked up.
Yeah, but the great part about it is that the attempt to do that is also part of the grand fucked up story. So at some stage, you even have to accept the ignorance, right?
Yeah, the grace and the failure. Yeah, the grace and the failure.
Yeah, it's such a cool story that there are Michael Shermans that are fucking dumb enough to close the book on nature, and it's like, oh man, this is gonna work out to be the best play I've ever seen.
The failure of the success is failure, the failure is success.
Yeah.
He closes the book and then has an experience that makes him question everything. He's like, fuck, I need to open that book. Where'd that book go?
Yeah, just when you nail it all down, it'll explode in your face again, and that's like, what could be better, man? What could be better? But yeah, I think from a point of view of a shaman, is they just have delight in the lila and the creation, just in terms of the universe, and it's endless subtleties and twists and turns and stuff. So it's like an endlessly entertaining movie. And then at some stage, I think the real death, at the end of the octave, what they call Maha Samadhi, or full realization, is really just when you just get tired of the movie. It's just so beautiful and so wonderful, but eventually you need to sleep. It's kind of like you need to just say, yeah, this is wonderful, and just withdraw. And then that's a full death, right? That's how you're supposed to die. Dying, that's the ripeness is all. If you die unripe, you die in wanting more life, wishing that life could be some other way, sacrificing life in a shitty situation, basically. All of those things are ways of not living life to the full, not draining the lees on life. So it's a pseudo life. But full ripeness is appreciating that, how fantastic and diverse and all the possibilities, in infinite possibilities in the universe. And then it's just pure love. I mean, we're part of the universe, and here we are observing the universe. It's just we're making love to ourselves by observing the universe. And on that note, we better stop.
Yeah, we better stop monkey braining Q, or he's going to be there all night, never get any sleep.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got too much, I think, in this last part, so we better give it back to the universe, because you don't want to get attached to it. We're trying to get rid and break away and release all these attachments, and we're not trying to gain. We're not trying to get more attachments. So we might have got more attachments in this last one, so let's just give it up. And the way to give it up is to just consciously fall still, breathe out, let all the desires, the clinging, the acquisitiveness, all delusions that it might be some kind of progress or insight, just give them up as complete folly and ignorance. Om Paramatmane Namah Iti. There we go. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right,
Everyone
thank
have
you.
a good
Thank
week.
you.
Be safe.
Have a nice week.
That was great.
Yep. Have a nice week. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.